Hi, I'm Declan Quigley of Anam, Nasca Shamanism.
And I'm Eileen McCourt, spiritual author and teacher.
Welcome to this week's instalment of the Nature of series. And today we'll be looking at the nature of symbolism in the Gospel.
We looked at symbolism before, we mentioned it before in the previous video, Christianity. And in that Christianity one, we saw that the Gospels do not reflect real events that happened. We saw and we explained that those Gospels were not written by the disciples of Jesus. They were not four independent pieces of writing. And we saw them written by very highly literate and intelligent Greek writers. So we also have got to look at the way in which people wrote in those days. Not like today. People wrote in those days with the intention of coding and hiding meanings, symbolism. And the Gospels are the same. Now, the fact that we know the Gospels do not represent actual happenings, the fact that we know that the Jesus of the Gospels did not actually exist, the fact that we know that the Gospels were written as Roman propaganda during the Roman Flavian dynasty, the same times as the Gospels were written, the Roman Flavian dynasty being in power from 69 to 96 CE, the Gospel had been written exactly within that time space, between 70 and 98 CE. We know all that, and the fact that we know that does not stop us from finding the hidden meanings and the wisdom that comes from the Gospels. A bit like Little Red Riding Hood and the fairy tales. We can read those on the pleasure level, but we've got to look beneath the fairy tales to find the symbolism and what they're trying to tell us. Same as the Gospels. Little Red Riding Hood did not exist. The symbolism there is that Little Red Riding Hood has got to be able to distinguish between the sexual predator, the big bad wolf, and the good grandmother. That's part of her learning process. She did not exist. So, with the Gospels too, we do not need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We just look for the symbolism. And to start, first of all, we look at the birth of Jesus. There was no baby Jesus born in a manger, in a stable, on the 25th of December. We saw in the Christianity video that story is the story of all the gods. The story of the Son, S-U-N of God, in its transit through the 4 yearly seasons. Now let's look at the birth. There was no baby Jesus born. So what does that represent? That represents the birth of the Christ energy within each one of us. And the renewal every year. And the rise in that energy, the Kundalini energy, which brings us eventually to enlightenment. That's the birth. And the death and resurrection. The symbolism there, Declan.
That's right, and I mean, as far as I see it, the symbolism of the death and resurrection is about the Kundalini energy rising. It's about us transiting from this physical plane to the spiritual plane.
Yeah, we all transcend death. That's the message coming from Jesus resurrecting. He transcended death. Even the events that happened during his dying process, we have got in the Gospels the tearing of the veil of the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies. Look what that represents. The Holy of Holies was like the inner sanctum, the inner tabernacle in the temple, to which only the highest of the priests, the high priest, had access. All knowledge in there, God was in there, and they were the intermediaries between people and God. That veil was torn, completely torn top to bottom, and that represents for us the fact that we all have access to God. We don't need intermediaries. All knowledge is available to all of us. And even the fact that there was an earthquake in the Gospels when Jesus was dying, that represents to when the Kundalini goes through the crown chakra, as happened to Jesus when he expired on the cross, the final expire, right? That represents the fact that the body is in turmoil and chaos when you go through that Kundalini experience. So it's all symbolic. Even the miracles of Jesus, the feeding of the loaves and fishes, the feeding of the thousands of the crowds, that represents to the fact that we have the ability, everything we need is already within us. We don't have to go and look for it. It's already within each one of us. That's the main symbolism of the Gospels. And we've got to look for it because, as I've explained, the Gospels were written with hidden messages, coded, as all people wrote at that time. There's nothing unusual. That's the way people wrote at that time. Not like we do today. Everything's very much on the surface today. But in ancient times, that was the way literature and Gospels were written. Coded messages, same as the fairy tales. Deeper meaning behind the fairy tales. And with the birth of Jesus too, the fact that Jesus was born in a stable, that is symbolic of the ending of the ego, the nature of death of the ego, the poverty, and the no trappings of any material kind. That represents the death of the ego. Again, another episode in the Gospels deals with the baptism of Jesus. And when Jesus is baptized, the Gospels tell us the heavens were opened to him. It's not the heavens opened, it's the heavens were opened to him. That is symbolic of the Kundalini rising through the crown chakra when everything in the heavens is open to us. That's the symbolism there.
So was John the Baptist attuning Jesus to a specific energy in that baptism?
Yes, it's an attunement to the higher energy, the anointing, if you like, with water, which opened Jesus to all there is in all eternity, in everything. Like the Kundalini, once it goes through the crown chakra, opens us to everything. Everything is exposed, is open to us. When Jesus was baptized, the heavens were opened to him.
And that was similar to, would you say that was similar to a Reiki attunement?
Yes, similar to Reiki attunement, because each attunement raises the vibration to a higher level.
Well, Andy, the material that you're putting across today, it's very dense material and obviously new to some people. So could you give a brief summary of what you're saying?
Today, Declan, we talked about the fact that the Gospels are not true stories. Those things in the Gospels read about did not actually happen. That was the way people wrote in those days. They wrote stories or parables, same as the fairy tales, with a deeper coded meaning to them. Symbolism. The Gospels are all symbolic. A bit like Animal Farm, George Eliot. That book can be read on the basic level of the animals in the farm doing their own bit, rebelling against Mr. Jones. But the deeper meaning is that is a skit, a satire on the communist revolution in Russia in 1917. Every animal in the farm represented a person in the revolution. Every event represented an event in the actual revolution. And the Gospels are the same. Everything in the Gospels is symbolic of something. And we talked about the symbolism of the birth of Jesus, the symbolism of the death and resurrection of Jesus, the symbolism of the tearing of the veil in the Holy of Holies. We've got to look for the symbolism. That's what today's was about. And next week, we're going to be talking about the Christ consciousness. So I hope you join us next week again, and thank you for watching today. And until we meet again, namaste.
Thanks for watching. Namaste.